So good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to present my dissertation today. My dissertation's topic is the historiography around the Zheng missions. My supervisor was Professor Susanne Weigel-Schwitzig, and I completed my studies in my PhD studies in sinology in last year. Today, I would like to focus on the question how the Zheng missions have been discussed in the last about 2 decades in China. How does it relate to issues such as cultural diplomacy? And first of all, I would like to provide some background knowledge on Zheng. So, who was Zheng? What we know about his life, that he was born during the tumultuous years of the Yuan Ming transition in Yunnan to a Muslim family. He became a eunuch at the Ming court, and he led several large-scale missions at the order of the Yongle Emperor between 1405 and 1433 CE. So these were missions which were indeed large in scale, involving hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of crew members, and they included visits around 30 foreign port cities, reaching as far as East Africa. So in order to summarize his journeys, here we can see a map. So based on the primary sources, it is likely that Zheng traveled at least as far as Hormuz in today's Iran, and other subfleets of the missions, like smaller subfleets, also visited places in East Africa and in the Arabian Peninsula. Today, I'd like to focus on the historiography of the missions. And so during my dissertation, while I focused on the last 20 years or so, I also had an overview of, let's say, the evolution of historiography on the missions. So during the pre-modern era, the first important work on the missions was compiled in the so-called official history of the Ming Dynasty, the Ming Shi, or History of the Ming. Here we see a summary of the main achievements of the missions, of the places it visited. And this account was compiled during the subsequent Qing Dynasty and by the court historians, as it was the tradition with the so-called official histories. So the Ming-Shu account had a great influence on the later historiography of the missions, and some more like fantasy elements were also often uncritically taken over from the Ming-Shu. For example, this enormous size of Zhenghe's so-called treasure ships, which are in fact not mentioned in primary sources, but they appear first in the Ming-Shu, but they were often taken over by later historians, but also nautical experts have questioned the plausibility of such sizes. In the early 20th century, the missions were mostly forgotten, except in Fujian in Southeast China and among the Southeast Asian diaspora, as some scholars have demonstrated. But by the influential reformist intellectual Liang Qichao, so an article was written by him with the title of The Biography of the Great Navigator of the Motherland, Zheng in 1904. And this led to sort of the revival of interest in the missions. So Liang Qichao also mostly based his account on the Mingshi account, and his work emphasized sort of the past maritime greatness of China, and in the context of the anti-colonial struggles of the late Qing and early Republican periods. So the missions were also referenced to some extent in cultural diplomacy during the Mao era. So Zhou Enlai, in his visits to Africa, for example, referred to the missions. So, of course, the focus during the Mao era was on promoting the supposed pacifist traditions of Chinese foreign policy, to build solidarity with other countries of the so-called third world, and especially this kind of pacifist traditions were contrasted to Western colonialism and imperialism. The Zheng missions in the reform and opening up period received a new kind of significance. So this was, of course, a time when China was, the Chinese government was interested in opening up economically, engaging in trade relations with the outside world. And in this context, Zheng became an important symbol of traditions of openness and trade engagement with other countries. So already during the 1980s, at the 580th anniversary of the first mission, there were a lot of commemorations of Zheng, a lot of publications about the missions. So turning to the developments of the last about 20 years, which was the main focus of the dissertation. So 2005 was an important year. This was the 600th anniversary of the first mission, and the largest spike in publication numbers can also be observed from this year. And to a lesser extent, also the inauguration of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. This resulted in increased numbers of publications on the missions. So I argue in my dissertation that the sort of the focus in the last 20 years has shifted from simply just discussing openness and trade with other countries to also discussing the relevance of the Zheng missions as sort of so for the present day foreign policy of China and for present day global and regional order. And for this reason, we also need to understand that the Zheng missions are usually discussed as part of the so-called tributary system of interstate relations in pre-modern Eastern Asia. And so in the last 20 years, there has been this growing interest about how sort of the Zheng missions and the early Ming tributary system were sort of a model for interstate relations in this region. So here is a chart of publication numbers from the Chinese database CNKI between 1980 and 2020. And we see that there was this huge spike in 2005. And there was also a smaller spike in 1985. And also somewhat more publications around 2014. So I would like to discuss here why, first of all, we need to have a critical perspective and critical mindset when sort of analyzing the sources on the missions. So there has been a lot of myth-making for various purposes around the missions, and also pseudo-historicism. And one of the main issues is here, so especially by the Chinese government, the missions are often depicted as overtly pacifist, only interested in peaceful trade. So it is true that the Zheng missions were apparently not interested in conquering other countries in the period, but some armed conflicts appeared during the missions. So the Ming rulers wanted to put down any open resistance to their sort of nominal authority in the Indo-Pacific region of the time. So another point is that in Indonesia, especially, where there is also a discussion of the missions, so it's often about Zhenghe's perception as a devout Muslim who was spreading, proselytizing Islam in Southeast Asia, and who had a role in spreading Islam in Indonesia. And in fact, we don't know too much about, first of all, Zhenghe's personal beliefs. What we know is that he supported various religions, including Buddhism and the Mazu faith of the sea goddess Mazu in China. And also there is no clear evidence that the Zheng missions were aimed at proselytizing Islam in Southeast Asia. So the other is related to the routes taken by the missions and the technological aspects of the missions. So there are the books written by a former UK Navy member, Gavin Menzies, which became quite financially a success. But so the claims in Menzies' books, namely that Zhenghe's fleet reached America, Antarctica, Australia, and Europe, they do not have a basis in the primary sources, or they are rejected by renowned academics, including nautical experts as well, and they are described as pseudo-historiography mostly. And we do not have evidence that Zheng reached areas further than the East African coast, or members of the Zheng missions. So these books are not recommended to read. I just wanted to show that there has been a whole series of these pseudo-historical books about Zheng, but they are not accepted by scholars. So so this way I reached the conclusion of the presentation. So first of all, I argue that the Zheng missions were an important global moment of pre-modern China. There are no similar examples of such large-scale and state-coordinated episodes of interaction between China and the outside world. So the foreign policy ideas of pre-modern and in this case Ming China were not the same as today. There were no modern notions of national sovereignty, and some episodes of armed intervention occurred. Nevertheless, we can say that apparently the Ming dynasty at the time did not seek conquest or direct political economic control of foreign countries. What they were interested was to sort of uphold their nominal, mostly ceremonial authority through tributary exchanges. And perhaps most importantly, from present perspective, they also sort of were interested in maintaining regional stability through controlling the main sort of routes of interaction in this Indo-Pacific region. So why it is important today? Because today this is increasingly discussed as sort of a pre-modern Chinese model for China's role as a regional sort of guarantor of stability in the what we call today the Indo-Pacific region. So it has increasingly discussed, let's say, also in the Chinese government's communications, when like such concepts are as peaceful development or sort of the responsible great power slogans are discussed, or in the context of Belt and Road Initiative, cultural diplomacy. And we must nevertheless be critical when we read about the missions. We need to distinguish plausible and balanced approaches from, let's say, politically motivated narratives, one-sided interpretations, myth-making, and pseudo-historiography, as I introduced it in my presentation. So lastly, I would like to recommend some literature. So those who are interested more in the primary sources, here is a list. The most important primary sources, mostly written in classical Chinese. Those who want to also learn and develop their classical Chinese reading skills. And also the sources cited, some further recommended literature in English and German. And lastly, I would like to share the link to my dissertation for those who are interested in downloading it and reading the full text. So the dissertation is available at the University of Vienna's UCSIS database. And so thank you very much for the attention. And those who have further questions or comments, please do not hesitate to contact me in email or on LinkedIn or on other kind of social media. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the East Asia Day.